In the shadowed realm of detective horror stories, mysteries and malevolence converge. These tales plunge into the abyss of human darkness, where detectives must confront not only the macabre crimes before them, but also the chilling, supernatural forces that lurk in the periphery. Haunting whispers, unexplained phenomena, and otherworldly entities add an eerie layer of suspense and dread to these narratives, blurring the lines between the known and the supernatural. As these detectives delve deeper into their cases, they must unravel the mysteries that defy logic and reason, all while facing the horrifying truth that some nightmares can't be explained away by science or solved with mere deduction. Brace yourself for a journey into the heart of darkness, where the unexplained becomes the unescapable, and every clue leads to a deeper, more horrifying revelation. The haunting echo. Retired detective Samuel Lawson had spent most of his life chasing criminals and solving cases, but there was one that had always haunted him: the case of Henry Markham. Markham had been a seemingly ordinary man who had committed unimaginable atrocities, driven by a belief that an otherworldly entity controlled his every action. Years had passed since Markham's capture and subsequent incarceration in a high-security mental institution. The detective had believed that he had put the horrors of that case behind him, but something had gnawed at him in the shadows of his memory, a growing unease that he couldn't ignore. One evening, as Samuel sat in his dimly lit living room, nursing a glass of whiskey, the memory of Markham's chilling words echoed in his mind. "The entity will move on, detective. It will find another vessel, and the cycle will continue." The detective had always dismissed Markham's words as the ramblings of a deranged mind. But now, as he looked at his own son, Ethan, a sense of dread began to creep over him. Ethan had always been a quiet and introverted young man, but recently, he had become withdrawn and distant. He spent hours alone in his room, lost in his thoughts. Samuel couldn't help but notice the eerie similarity between his son's behavior and that of Markham before his descent into madness. One evening, as Samuel was about to retire to bed, he heard hushed whispers emanating from Ethan's room. Curiosity and concern got the better of him, and he slowly pushed open the door. Inside, he found Ethan sitting in a dimly lit room, surrounded by candles. His eyes were vacant, and he appeared to be in a trance, muttering incoherent phrases under his breath. Samuel's heart pounded in his chest as he approached his son, shaking him gently. "Ethan, what are you doing?" Ethan's eyes snapped open, and they were filled with a cold, unnatural intensity. "I'm communicating with it, Dad. The entity." Fear coursed through Samuel as he remembered Markham's words. "No, Ethan. You can't believe in such things. It's madness." But Ethan's voice grew stronger, more commanding. "You don't understand, Dad. It's real. It speaks to me, guides me, and it wants me to do something terrible." Samuel's mind raced as he grappled with the chilling possibility that his son might be succumbing to the same delusions that had consumed Markham. He needed to know more, to understand what had driven Markham to madness. He decided to visit the incarcerated killer, seeking answers to the horrifying questions that plagued him. Markham's eyes gleamed with malevolence as Samuel entered the sterile, high-security interview room. "Detective Lawson," Markham hissed. "I've been waiting for you. The entity warned me you'd come." Samuel leaned in closer, his voice laced with urgency. "Tell me, Markham, what is this entity? What does it want?" Markham's lips curled into a sinister smile. "It's ancient, older than time itself. It seeks out the broken and tormented souls, those who are vulnerable to its whispers. It revels in chaos and suffering." The detective's blood ran cold as he listened to Markham's unhinged ramblings. "How can it be stopped?" Markham's laughter echoed through the room. "You can't stop it, detective. It's already found a new vessel just as I predicted, and this time it won't be contained." A sense of dread washed over Samuel as he realized the terrible truth. Markham's words were not the ravings of a madman, they were a dire warning. Rushing home, Samuel confronted Ethan, desperate to protect his son from the malevolent entity's influence. But it was too late. Ethan's eyes were vacant, his voice no longer his own. "It's too late, Dad," Ethan whispered, his tone filled with an eerie calmness. "The entity is here, and it has plans for me." The room grew cold as an ominous presence filled the air. Samuel watched in helpless horror as his son began to chant dark incantations, his body convulsing with each word. In that moment, Detective Samuel Lawson realized that he had failed to protect his family from the insidious darkness that had once consumed Henry Markham. The entity had found a new vessel, and the cycle of terror and tragedy would continue, echoing through the generations, a chilling reminder that some horrors could never truly be vanquished. Detective Sarah Mitchell had always prided herself on her rationality and her ability to solve even the most baffling of cases. But the case that would come to be known as the Haunting of Ravenwood Manor would test the limits of her skepticism and plunge her into a world of the supernatural. It all began when Sarah received a call from her friend and fellow detective, Mark Anderson. He sounded frantic, his voice trembling with fear as he described the strange events unfolding at Ravenwood Manor, a sprawling mansion on the outskirts of town. "Sarah, you won't believe what's happening here," Mark said. "It's like something out of a horror movie. We need your help." Despite her initial skepticism, Sarah agreed to go to Ravenwood Manor to see for herself what was happening. As she drove to the mansion, she couldn't help but feel a sense of unease settling over her. The night was dark and the rain fell steadily, creating an eerie atmosphere. When Sarah arrived at Ravenwood Manor, she was greeted by Mark and a group of officers who looked shaken and pale. They led her into the mansion, which was grand and opulent, but now filled with an oppressive air of dread. As they entered the main hall, Sarah could hear strange noises coming from all around them, a faint whispering, the creaking of floorboards, and the occasional chilling laughter. It was as if the very walls of the house were alive with a malevolent presence. Mark took her to the center of the mansion, where a group of terrified witnesses were gathered. They recounted their experiences, describing objects moving on their own, ghostly apparitions, and a feeling of being watched at all times. One woman claimed to have been pushed down the stairs by an unseen force. Sarah listened carefully to their accounts, her skepticism slowly giving way to a growing sense of unease. She had never encountered anything like this in all her years as a detective. The witnesses led Sarah to a room on the second floor where most of the disturbances seemed to be centered. The room was filled with antique furniture, covered in dusty sheets and lined with old portraits of stern-looking individuals. But what caught Sarah's attention the most was a large, ornate mirror on the far wall. As she approached the mirror, she could see her own reflection. But there was something off about it. Her reflection seemed to move independently, its eyes locking onto her with a malevolent gaze. Sarah shivered and looked away, her heart pounding. One of the witnesses, a man in his 40s, spoke up. "That mirror is the source of all our troubles," he said. "It's like a gateway to another world, a world filled with darkness." Sarah turned back to the mirror, and as she stared into its depths, she felt a sudden chill run down her spine. It was as if she could see beyond the glass into a realm of shadows and despair. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, Sarah decided to set up surveillance cameras throughout Ravenwood Manor. She also called in a team of paranormal investigators to help assess the situation. As the days went by, the investigators captured numerous unexplained phenomena on camera. Objects moving on their own, strange shadows, and even disembodied voices. The paranormal investigators began to suspect that the house was haunted by a malevolent spirit, one that was trapped between the realms of the living and the dead. They believed that the spirit was trying to communicate something that had happened in the past and needed to be resolved. Sarah delved into the history of Ravenwood Manor, uncovering a dark and tragic past. It turned out that the mansion had once belonged to a wealthy family in the 19th century. The family had been known for their cruelty and mistreatment of their servants, and rumours of dark rituals and occult practices had swirled around them. One particular family member, a young woman named Isabella, had been at the centre of the rumours. She was said to have been a practitioner of the dark arts and had been involved in a forbidden romance with a servant. When their love was discovered, tragedy had struck, leading to a series of deaths and disappearances within the mansion. Sarah and the paranormal investigators believed that Isabella's restless spirit was the source of the disturbances at Ravenwood Manor. They theorized that she was trying to reach out from beyond the grave to reveal the truth of what had happened all those years ago. To communicate with the spirit, they decided to hold a séance in the very room where the mirror stood. They gathered in a circle, joined hands, and called out to Isabella's spirit. The atmosphere in the room grew heavy and charged with energy. Suddenly, the mirror began to tremble and shake, and an otherworldly voice filled the room. It was a voice filled with sorrow and longing, and it told a tale of forbidden love, betrayal, and a tragic ending. As the séance concluded, the paranormal investigators and Sarah felt a profound sense of closure. It seemed that Isabella's spirit had finally found peace, and the disturbances in Ravenwood Manor began to subside. Sarah couldn't deny the existence of the supernatural any longer. She had witnessed firsthand the power of the unknown, and it had shaken her to her core. Ravenwood Manor remained a place of mystery, but at least now its restless spirit had been put to rest. As she left the mansion behind, Sarah Mitchell knew that she would carry the memory of the haunting of Ravenwood Manor with her for the rest of her life, a reminder that there were forces in the world beyond her understanding, and that sometimes the truth was far stranger and more terrifying than anything she could have imagined. Detective James Callahan had seen his fair share of gruesome crime scenes over the years, but nothing could have prepared him for the horrors he was about to uncover. It was a dark and stormy night when he received the call that would change his life forever. The call came in just after midnight, a frantic voice on the other end of the line, barely coherent. It was the dispatcher at the local police station, and she was almost in tears as she tried to explain the situation. "Detective Callahan, you need to get to the old abandoned asylum on Elm Street right away," she said, her voice shaking. "We've got a situation here, and it's bad, real bad." Callahan could hear the fear in her voice, and he knew he had to act fast. He grabbed his coat and rushed out the door, the rain pouring down in torrents as he made his way to his car. The drive to the asylum was eerie, the wind howling through the trees, and the thunder rumbling in the distance. When he arrived at the asylum, he was met by a group of officers, all of them looking pale and shaken. They led him inside the building, which was dark and decrepit, the walls covered in peeling paint and the floors creaking ominously beneath their feet. "What's going on here?" Callahan asked, his heart pounding in his chest. One of the officers, a young rookie named Anderson, spoke up. "We got a tip from an anonymous caller," he said. "They said there was something unnatural happening here." As they walked further into the asylum, Callahan could feel a growing sense of dread. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and the darkness seemed to press in on them from all sides. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. They finally reached a room at the end of a long corridor, and what they found inside was a scene straight out of a nightmare. The room was filled with strange symbols drawn on the walls in what looked like blood, and in the center of the room was a circle of candles, their flames flickering eerily in the dim light. But what caught Callahan's attention the most was the body lying in the center of the circle. It was the body of a young woman, her eyes wide open in terror, her mouth frozen in a silent scream. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her fingers were twisted into claw-like shapes. Callahan knelt down beside the body, his gloved hand trembling as he touched her cold skin. He could tell that she had been dead for hours, but there was something about her expression that sent shivers down his spine. "What the hell happened here?" he muttered to himself. Anderson cleared his throat and spoke up again. "We don't know, Detective. We found her like this when we arrived, and there's no sign of anyone else in the building." Callahan stood up and turned to face the officers. "I want this place sealed off immediately," he said, "and I want a full forensic team to comb through every inch of this building. We need to find out what happened here." As the officers scrambled to follow his orders, Callahan couldn't shake the feeling that they were dealing with something beyond their understanding. He had seen plenty of gruesome crimes in his career, but this was different. There was an air of malevolence in the asylum, a sense that something truly evil had taken place within its walls. Over the next few days, the forensic team worked tirelessly to gather evidence and piece together what had happened in the asylum. The symbols on the walls turned out to be a form of ancient occult ritual, and the candles were laced with a strange substance that defied analysis. As they dug deeper, they discovered that the asylum had a dark history of its own. It had been the site of countless experiments and treatments, many of which had been conducted in secret and had left a trail of suffering and death in their wake. But what haunted Callahan the most were the rumours he heard from the locals. They spoke of strange happenings in the asylum, of ghostly apparitions and unexplained disappearances. Some claimed that the building was cursed, that it was a gateway to the supernatural. As the investigation continued, Callahan couldn't shake the feeling that they were dealing with forces beyond their control. He knew that he had to uncover the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. And so, Detective James Callahan delved deeper into the darkness of the abandoned asylum, determined to uncover the secrets hidden within its walls. But as he ventured further into the abyss, he couldn't help but wonder if he had stumbled upon something that should have remained hidden, something that should never have seen the light of day. The forensic team had discovered more bodies, each with the same horrifying expressions frozen on their faces. Some were patients who had been left to suffer in the asylum's dark history, while others seemed to have no connection to the place at all. It was as if the asylum had become a magnet for death and despair. Callahan interviewed the few surviving former staff members, and their stories were chilling. They spoke of strange occurrences, of hearing whispers in the dark, of shadows that moved on their own. Some had seen apparitions, the same ghostly figures that the locals had mentioned. One night, as Callahan was reviewing the evidence in his office, he heard a noise coming from the hallway outside. He grabbed his flashlight and cautiously stepped into the dimly lit corridor. The flickering light barely illuminated the long abandoned stretch of the asylum. As he moved down the corridor, he noticed that the air had grown colder and his breath formed misty clouds in front of him. The sound that had drawn him there was faint but unmistakable, a soft, mournful wail that sent shivers down his spine. He followed the eerie sound to a room at the end of the hallway. The door was ajar, and the feeble light from his flashlight revealed a gruesome sight. The room was filled with old medical equipment, rusty scalpels and syringes. But what caught Callahan's attention was the figure huddled in the corner. It was a woman, her hair matted and tangled, her eyes wide with terror. She was clutching a tattered blanket around her, rocking back and forth as she muttered incoherently. Callahan approached her cautiously. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked softly, trying to keep his voice calm and reassuring. The woman's eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, they seemed to clear. "They're still here," she whispered. "The experiments, they never stopped." Callahan called for assistance, and the woman was taken to a nearby hospital for evaluation. He knew that her story might hold the key to unraveling the asylum's dark secrets. Over the following days, Callahan and his team continued their investigation. They learned that the asylum had been the site of cruel experiments conducted by a deranged doctor who had been obsessed with the occult. Patients had been subjected to torturous procedures in an attempt to tap into the supernatural, all in the name of twisted science. As they dug deeper into the doctor's history, they discovered that he had mysteriously disappeared decades ago, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. Some believed he had been consumed by the malevolent forces he had sought to harness. Callahan couldn't help but wonder if the doctor's experiments had unleashed something unholy within the asylum, something that still lurked in the shadows, feeding on the despair and suffering that had permeated the building for so long. One night, as Callahan and his team explored the asylum's underground tunnels, they stumbled upon a hidden chamber filled with ancient texts and arcane symbols. It was there that they found a journal belonging to the doctor, detailing his descent into madness and his twisted experiments. As they read through the journal, they realized that the doctor had believed he could bridge the gap between the living and the dead, that he could harness the power of the supernatural to achieve immortality. But his experiments had gone horribly wrong, and the malevolent forces he had unleashed had exacted a terrible price. As Callahan closed the journal, he knew that they had uncovered the truth about the asylum's dark history. But he also knew that the malevolent presence still lingered, a restless and vengeful spirit that would never find peace. With a heavy heart, Detective James Callahan knew that the horrors of the asylum would continue to haunt him, a reminder of the darkness that could lurk within the human soul and the terrifying unknown that could be unleashed when science and the supernatural collided. He vowed to never forget the victims and to do whatever it took to ensure that the asylum's malevolent secrets would never be unleashed upon the world again. Thanks for watching. To support us, please like and subscribe.